Hi, DIFESTers. My name is Rudnov Vincent, and I am the founder of DIFEST Global. A warm welcome to you all on the third edition. This year, DIFEST will focus on the future of work by addressing authenticity, belongingness, and social impact as some of those important practices for building a more inclusive and purpose driven workforce for everyone to thrive. Before we begin, I would like to humbly thank our belonging partner, Newsella, for supporting our initiative in democratizing world class content and promoting equity in education. On this note, I would like to welcome you to our session on understanding intersectional inclusion through the lens of LGBTQ in sport. Our moderator for today is the Chief Empathy Officer of the Inclusion Imperative. He has a particular expertise in LGBTQ inclusion and its intersectionality with other marginalized characteristics. He is a thought leader and driver of positive change in the DEI space. He focuses on challenging received wisdoms to foster cultural reinvention and encourages business learning by promoting the value of authenticity, empathy, and psychological safety in the workplace through his advisory work, speaking, training, coaching, and mentorship engagements. Please welcome Geff Parsons.
Thank you very much, Rudy. That's quite the introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to myself. As Devin said, as Rudy said, my name is Geff. My pronouns are he, him. I think our timing is excellent because, as far as I know, back in my homeland in England, they're just kicking off the Rugby League World Cup right now. And right now, here I am in discussion for what I hope will be a very interesting fireside chat with Devin Ibanez. So Devin, welcome. I'm going to give a quick introduction about you, and you can add anything that you'd like to yourself for the people who are listening. So the reason one of the main reasons Devin is here is that he is the first openly gay professional rugby player in the US, having played Major League Rugby. He was raised in Boston, Massachusetts, and holds a degree in sports management and education from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Previously played for the Major League Rugby team, the New England Free Jacks, now plays for Richmond RFC in West London in England, and has won a gold medal representing Team USA at the World Maccabi Games in Israel in 2017, as well as the D1 National Championship with his team, Mystic River Rugby Club, in 2018. Devin, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And also, you mentioned the Rugby League World Cup. There's also the Rugby World Cup that's happening right now, which is formerly known as the Women's Rugby World Cup. So that was also an interesting shift where they've changed it now to just being called the World Cup or the Rugby World Cup. And people were very upset about that. Anyways, I'm Devin. It's a pleasure to meet everybody. Thank you so much for having me. As Geoff mentioned, I came out in 2020 as the first ever openly gay Major League Rugby player. Since then, I've done a lot of public speaking and trying to do a lot of community outreach, both through coaching and working with LGBTQ plus organizations such as International Gay Rugby, and going into different schools and sort of speaking about my experiences with, different students and athletes who may not have been exposed to an openly gay athlete, at any level of the sport. So that's been sort of my big focus since coming out. And I just recently moved to London, as Geoff mentioned. So thank you all for having me.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be very interesting. So let's get started. I think we have about half an hour to chat, maybe a little bit more. And a message to everyone listening: questions are welcome. Please do send in any questions that you would like through the chat functions, either on YouTube or this medium that we're on, here, StreamYard. And we'll try to do those either during the course of the chat or at the end if we don't get to them while we're chatting. So on with the fireside chat. Just imagine that we're sitting next to a fireplace. You have to, because unfortunately we're on a computer, but there could be a fireplace if the weather is challenging. So Devin, take me back to the day, I think it was in late 2020, when, having thought about this, I'm sure, for quite some time, as most of us do, you decided to press send on a message, I think, on Instagram, which basically made yourself, publicly known as I described you, the first openly gay professional rugby player in the US. What was your thought process at the time? Why did you choose that time? Why did you do it not earlier? And what's been the reaction like for you since?
Why didn't I do it earlier? That's the question I had many times to myself after doing it. Well, it's also funny you mentioned being by a fire, because right now I'm in a room right next to the boiler. So it feels like I'm sitting right next to a fire. So right at home with the fireside chat. And in terms of what made me, choose that time specifically from when I came out, I'd been, planning, or maybe I should say hoping, to come out for, several years prior. I'd come out to my parents when I was 11 years old. Like, there was never really any question from my perspective around my identity or, whether or not my family was going to support me. I was always very lucky in that respect. I think that I also just had an understanding that it would be beneficial to me if I could find a way to separate my, rugby career and athletics career from my personal life and my sexuality, because, at the time when you're growing up and you're a teenage boy, I think a lot of us can picture the kinds of things that are said in locker rooms and by coaches and by teammates. So it just became a thing that I put off for a very long time. And it got to the point where I'd traveled the world playing rugby, and I still hadn't made that decision. I still hadn't made that move that I told myself I was going to do. And when it happened in 2020, it was something that I'd known, as I mentioned, that I wanted to do it for a while. It had even gotten to the point where I'd actually written it down on a list of things that I wanted to accomplish, right next to take out the trash and do your laundry. There was, hey, you should come out at some point. And it was actually really kind of a series of low moments that led me to actually following through on it. A few months prior to me coming out, actually about a month and a half prior, I'd had a puppy in my life who was with me throughout the pandemic. She was a year-old puppy named Ruby, and she actually suddenly passed away from a seizure about a month and a half before I came out. And I was already just really struggling with the pandemic because I was in a long-distance relationship with my partner Fergus, and so I hadn't been able to see him for over a year. I didn't really have an idea of when travel bans would be lifted and I'd be able to see them. So when Ruby passed away, that was really kind of like the last thing that I was holding on to that was kind of getting me through, right? And it was kind of keeping the distraction of not being able to play rugby and not being able to be with my partner. After my dog passed away, it all kind of just came crashing down on me, and I really fell into a very depressed kind of state. And it got to the point where, like I said, I was really struggling to do basic tasks, which is why I was making these lists and why I was really trying to, push myself and motivate myself to get on the right path. But when I sat down that one day and decided to write the post, I was at a point where things were so low for me, and I'd gotten to the point where I'd identified that it was something that would immediately improve things for me. I'm like, this is something you've wanted. This is something your partner has wanted. Like, what is stopping you? And I just sat down during a lunch break and I wrote this long-winded message. And it actually wasn't Instagram. It was actually Facebook. I went to my Facebook, which was full of people who I'd played rugby with throughout the years and people who I'd met along the way. And I went on there and I posted a long message just about my experience being, the only openly gay professional player, and how I'd wanted to speak out and, didn't really have the courage to for a lot of years. And it was actually the reception on Facebook and all the support I got that inspired me to make my Instagram and have that be my first post. So I actually didn't even have an Instagram before I'd made that post on Facebook. It was all the support, and all the outpouring of love that I got and kind of it going sort of viral that led me to this idea of, hey, well, maybe I should just create an Instagram and tell a little bit more of my story through there.
I mean, that's amazing. I'm sure what you've said about the struggles that you went through, and particularly during the pandemic, that resonates with a lot of people who, just whose mental well-being struggled at that time, regardless of the fact that they may be dealing with other stuff, that they've got to think about how they disclose, such as that. How was it for you? I mean, obviously the sending that post sounds like it was quite a cathartic experience for you, but what was the reaction afterwards?
The reaction was, I mean, from my immediate circle and my teammates and my coaches, it was fantastic. I mean, like I didn't have a single person who reached out to me who I'd known personally who had, negative things to say. I think maybe the more noticeable things are the people who don't reach out. I think that's where you start getting into the weeds a bit as well. Who didn't I hear from during this time, but it'd be really hard for me to be picky about it. Everyone was incredible. People who I wasn't really sure what their response would be were pretty outwardly supportive. My teammates especially were, not only just supportive, but showed an active interest in kind of reflecting on themselves and reflecting on the team environments they've been in and thinking, well, was this really as inclusive as I thought it was? Or did I just feel like it was inclusive because I wasn't somebody who was predisposed to feeling excluded, And I think that was a difficult question that a lot of them had to ask themselves. But I got a little bit of negative pushback here and there from the wider rugby community just because of the internet,
Right.
They go to their rugby page and they want to see their rugby things and they see my gay self with my partner and they get upset. So it was really a positive response. I think that where I started to struggle was the situation I was playing in at home was around a lot of people who I'd known for a very long time. And I think for some coaches, when I came out, they saw that as, oh, he's reached his mountaintop, right? Like he's done his big accomplishment. He's probably not that motivated to be, playing anymore. And I feel like I kind of got gently pushed off to the side, being like, this person's already had their moment. But I'm also 29, so maybe I'm reading into it a little bit too much, But I think that a lot of what I experienced was more in between the lines stuff. I mean, if you want, I can go into a little bit of detail about that. I've really only had one kind of significant negative experience since I came out, and it was actually somewhat recent. I was playing with Team USA in Israel for the World Maccabea Games. I'm saying this here because I trust this is a great group of people. I'm sure none of you guys are going to go and talk to my USA Maccabi teammates or bother going out of your way to do this. But I was representing them in Israel with Team USA, and we played in the sevens final, or, we played in the sevens bronze medal game. And so we ended up winning the bronze medal in sevens, which was an awesome deal. It was my first time getting to represent the USA openly gay, and having my partner there and having my family there. After the game, I had this huge Progress Pride flag, and I was wearing that, and I was taking pictures with it. And when they're doing the medal ceremonies and everything, like, I'm holding up the flag and having a great time. And then right as we're doing all the team pictures and stuff, as we go to take another team picture, one of the officials on our team asks, "Hey, can you," or he says, "Oh, let's do one without the," he's like, "Do one without the flag," basically, is what he says. Is let's do one without the flag. And I was kind of ready to just sort of put it down and be like, all right, maybe variation. But my teammate next to me was like, hell no, keep the flag up. It's like, don't listen to that. But then what ended up happening was the next day, we won the bronze medal. It was a big deal. And so they make these articles and they put these posts out and they share about the team and about what we did. And the picture that they shared was of the entire team standing up there receiving their medals, except only one player was missing. And I had actually been cropped out of the photo on the end of the picture because I was holding a large pride flag. Which there were additional conversations that happened after that. But I think that's a good example of a situation where I actually felt incredibly included. Like, I actually felt like I had amazing teammates, and I had amazing, even to a degree, coaches and the culture they were creating. But there's still almost an obsession over how people are allowed to express themselves, right? A lot of the feedback I got was, well, maybe the flag you were holding was too big. You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe you were too openly gay. And I think that is something that I'm sure, if there are LGBTQ plus professionals in this company who are listening to this or watching this, maybe that's something that you can relate to, this sort of feeling, this need to tone down your expression for either the comfort of other people or, simply for the fact that they won't understand it and they'll think that you're, putting on a performance, or that you're, distracting from the company's values or from the organization's values that you're a part of. And I think that was what was really difficult for me to reconcile, and trying to explain to them that when you select people to represent your organization, you don't necessarily get to choose how that person expresses themselves. When you select them to represent you, you're putting that vote of confidence in them to say that we believe in you, we believe in your character, and we believe that you're going to represent us, to the best of your abilities.
I think absolutely. I mean, I think that many of us have worked in different, largely heteronormative environments, if you like. I mean, obviously, a rugby pitch is a pretty heteronormative place, but an awful lot of office places and what trading floors that I always worked on, variations on a theme, and there can be situations where you get a lot of people expressing, tokenistically that there's something that they actually are supportive of, but then you say you don't get invited to that drinks party, or you don't get included in that picture. So I think a lot of people will hear echoes of that, and it's interesting to see how the teamwork dynamic supported you in those circumstances. So I think a couple of lessons there is that one is that tokenism, the importance of the teamwork, and the point you made, I think, about people almost thinking that this was your summit, I'm sure you were thinking, look, I want to be known as a rugby player. I don't want to be known as necessarily a gay rugby player. That's an adjective which is not relevant. It's not, I'm primarily about the rugby. And I think, do you think that's what's stopping a lot of other people coming out? Basically, it's like you think, well, I'm working in finance, I'm whatever it is. I don't want that to be the label that people think of me as. I want to get on with my job and be good at that. Do you think it's a distraction? Do you think it's something which is holding people back from embracing their full identity because they think it's actually going to hinder them?
Oh, like 100%. I don't need to guess, because I lived the experience. I know, several other people who have also lived that experience. And, that was part of my decision when I made my Instagram as to why I chose the handle for it as being @thatgayrugger, was something that I actually did very intentionally, because, for the years that I played rugby, I mentioned that I came out when I was 11. I didn't make that post until I was, 28, 27 years old. So there's a pretty big gap there. And, when you're looking at that, the reason is because I didn't want that label, like you were saying, right? I didn't want my sexuality to become the only thing that I was known for, specifically in high school and in college when I was a captain of the team. I didn't want us to be looked at by every single team in the league, or be known every single team I went to play against of like, oh, there's that gay rugby player, right? Like, oh, it's the one gay person who actually plays the level of rugby we play. Like, interesting, right? Like, I just didn't want that to be the only thing I was known for. I wanted to be known for my ability. I wanted to be known for my leadership. I wanted to be known for my passion and my commitment to the game. And that's where that shift really happened for me before I came out, because for so many years, that was the narrative in my head, right? Was you don't want to put yourself in that box. You want to accomplish things just on your rugby merit. You don't want to take away opportunities you might, get otherwise. And as I mentioned, I was in a really low place before I came out, and it just got to the point where I was like, wait a minute. So you have this list that you made, and you have something at the top of that list that says, hey, this is something you'll do that will make not only you happier, it'll make your partner happier, but you're not doing it because you're worried about the perceptions of people and what they're going to say, right? And them saying that you're not a real rugby player, that you're just doing this for attention, that, okay, sure, you came out, but you're not actually going to play in the league. You're not going to get enough playing time. Like, all these things that I told myself were all, narratives that were being told to me by this imaginary, critical person. And it's like, why am I living my life based on somebody who I'd never be able to satisfy anyway? Like, this invisible person who, even if that was the case, like, there's never somebody who I was going to win over. And when that clicked with me, I think it just got in my head and finally realized how ridiculous it was that I'd, waited that long and taken such a long time to do it. But at the same time, it only feels ridiculous once you've gotten through to the other side and you've broken through that door and you look back at that person and you say, maybe all those negative things you were telling yourself weren't necessarily the reality at the time.
Right. And I'm sure that almost everybody who's actually been through that process of coming out, painful as it is, looks back at it kind of like you do and think, actually, thank goodness I finally got around to doing that, because, it was hurting me more than anyone else. But you had the benefit of a supportive team. You've mentioned. I know you also had some role models. Mark Bingham has been mentioned by you in the past. I'd like to, tell us a little bit about that story, if you wouldn't mind, because I think it's quite inspiring, but also just how you see the importance of having a role model, not being the first person. We all think, oh my God, we're the only person in the entire world like this when you're sitting and suffering in silence, which of course you're not. If you can find people who, make you feel that there's that you're not blazing a trail, that you can be what you can see, how important is that to people as well?
It's huge. And I mean, I'm glad you mentioned my teammates, because I think that as supportive as they were, I think that if people were a little bit more proactive and not waiting until somebody comes out to be supportive and sort of creating those environments, I think that goes a really long way. In terms of Mark Bingham, though, for those who don't know, I wish I had his entire documentary in front of me, but for everyone who doesn't know, Mark Bingham was an American hero who was actually on one of the planes that was hijacked by terrorists on 9/11. He was a part of a group of citizens who actually came together to overthrow the hijackers. And as a result, the plane landed in the middle of a field in DC, rather than, I think they were thinking it was either the Pentagon or the Capitol that it was headed for. So, between him and the other people on that flight, they stepped up and saved potentially thousands of American lives. And after the fact, it came out that he was a rugby player. And obviously the rugby community was incredibly proud. He went to Cal and was a high-level player. But shortly after that, it became clear that he was actually also a really proud, openly gay rugby player. And he had actually been instrumental in the starting of one of the first international gay rugby teams in the world, which was the San Francisco Fog, and was actually also looking to start a team in New York City. So he was a really big trailblazer for American gay rugby and for gay rugby globally. And after he passed away and everybody found out that this hero was not only a rugby player, they were a proud gay rugby player, it became something that the entire, American rugby community, specifically rugby, really rallied around Mark Bingham. But globally, I mean, gay rugby players now had, representation in their media that's very clear. It says, hey, this person is a hero who stepped up when there were, there's lots of people on that flight who could have stepped up. And there was one person up there who helped to work with that group of people and that was Mark Bingham, and he was a gay rugby player, and he was a hero. And once that spread, I think the community as a whole just realized they needed to do something to keep that legacy alive and to really try to bring the community together and strengthen it around his legacy. And that's what led to the creation of the Bingham Cup. So for those who don't know, that's essentially like a gay rugby World Cup that happens every 2 years in Canada. And for me, as I mentioned, I don't think I actually really had a lot of role models in terms of being openly gay in rugby. At the time, I think I'd heard of Gareth Thomas, but I wasn't, that aware of him. And he was a few generations ahead of me. And, especially in the US, when I found out a bit later in my life about Mark Bingham, and then finding out about his story and, thinking about the things that I wanted to accomplish and feeling like there weren't other players who were, playing a high level of rugby, but also proud of being gay and wanting to, share that and use it to improve their sport. Hearing about his legacy really lit a fire under me, and I think was a huge reason as to why I felt confident to, pursue being the first openly gay professional player. And I actually was extremely lucky and had a chance to meet Mark Bingham's mother, Alice. She was incredible and was at every single Bingham after Mark's death. She was at every single one, and she kind of became the adopted mother to, the entire international gay rugby community. And I had the opportunity to meet her and just really briefly told her and thanked her and mentioned, what I wanted to do. And, she was just incredibly supportive and so moved that I was, touched by her son's story in that way. Unfortunately, she passed away during the pandemic as well. And this year was the first year that they've done the Bingham Cup since the pandemic. And I got to go there after, becoming the first ever openly gay professional player. And, now with Mark Bingham's legacy, sort of, there's just this huge shift with now not having him around and not having his mother around. And it just felt like a really beautiful full circle moment where I was able to be there and be a part of it and hopefully represent this sort of next generation of gay rugby players who really want to carry it forward and want to show that, this is a space that can be for all of us.
And it's so powerful. I mean, it's role models, I think, in all walks of life are really essential. As I said, that the mantra is used, the often phrased mantra is, you can't be what you can't see. Well, somebody's got to be first, but most of us are not first. And it's certainly not in rugby. People like him and Gareth Thomas, you already mentioned, people like Keegan Hurst and Sam Stanley, even Nigel Owens as a referee. Rugby is seems like a pretty LGBTQ inclusive sport. And sport, I always think of as a very international language. I mean, cuts across languages, across cultures. It's a great way of pluralizing this kind of this debate and making people understand that, for some of us, this is actually really, really real. This is going to become quite the topical thing in the next few months with the Soccer World Cup coming up in Qatar, of course. But that brings me on to a point around, why you think, and how important it is to have with those role models, why everyone is saying we don't have any role models in say, professional football relative to rugby. Now, that's no longer true, of course, because we had Josh Cavallo came out a little while ago, and in the UK, we've had Jake Daniels has come out, but it's still hardly anyone. And there's all these worries about, sponsorship pressure, etc. I know it's not your sport, but do you have any views around, why that is the case, why rugby seems to be ahead of the game relative to other sports, and just how powerful it would be if somebody like a very well-known name in a very high-profile sport like football or tennis, for example, that I play, what would happen? Is that a sort of amplifier that we need?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, right? I think that I struggle to give rugby too much credit because I've been in rugby for a long time. And while I know that there are people who've decided to be openly gay and that it's a very positive sport environment, like I said, to me, a lot of it feels very retroactive rather than proactive, right? You've gone and you come out, oh, of course we're going to accept you, rather than, well, let's make sure that we have environments where people, when they come in, don't feel like they need to hide parts of themselves and don't feel like they need to try to, meld themselves into this culture that we've created. So in terms of why it's more difficult, though, I think that a big part of it, and this is just from my perspective, rugby players, we're not big and famous in the same way soccer players are. Right? That's kind of a big part of it as well, right? There's a huge platform for players like Josh Cavallo versus somebody like me, playing in the leagues I play in. Rugby is not a sport of glamour. It's not a massive media machine, right? It's a huge sport about grassroots. And the biggest thing that we preach on our grassroots is that rugby should be for everybody. Rugby should be about picking up the person next to you. Rugby should be about creating positive environments, right? And to the degree that we do a good job of actually, living up to that, that's up for debate. And I think it depends on where you go. But in terms of it being an underlying value of the sport, everyone would agree on that, right? We would all agree that those are important values. We all might just disagree on how good we are at actually living up to them. And I think that might be the difference, is the emphasis on soccer has shifted so far to professionalism that there's not as much of an emphasis on grassroots level, focusing on inclusion, focusing on creating environments where everybody feels like they have an opportunity to succeed and participate.
So I guess what that means for us, those of us who don't play sport for a living, I mean, just because the CEO isn't coming out doesn't mean that, your colleagues, at the grassroots level aren't, just as important in that journey, and you need to be supporting each other and having each other's backs. It's just as important. Role models are important, but they're not everything, and you need to be role models to each other as well, which is really great. Now, I want to pick you up on the point you made around it is, for those of us outside looking in, rugby looks very inclusive, but you said it could be more so, it could be more proactively inclusive. But I know there's, at least for some of us, and I know this includes you as well, there's possibly a sort of caveat to that at the moment, and it's around the issue of trans inclusion, which I think is extraordinarily important as well in a business and commercial context, because it's going right to the heart of the whole issue about not just minority inclusion, but how that fits within business and every kind of work environment, including sport. This is a subject I know you've been very, very vocal on, because earlier this year, I think it was, what the World Rugby Organization came out and basically effectively banned trans women from participating in rugby at the elite level. He said, fine, you can do it at grassroots level, but you've got nothing to aspire to. You're never going to get to the elite level. We don't think it's causing a problem. And they cited two reasons. One, they said, was safety, by which I assume they meant physical safety of biological women relative to trans women, and an unfair advantage. Basically, if you went through puberty as a male, you must have an unfair advantage physiologically, etc. I'm going to stop talking because I really want to hear your view on this, because I know you've done a lot of work, including a lot of fundraising in this, and how important that is as an inclusion issue in your mind.
I think it's extremely important. I think that, a lot of people, when I came out, it was the same thing of like, oh, look how inclusive our sport is. Look at how great we are for LGBTQ plus people. And, when you look at women's rugby, has been long time known as being a haven for, not only trans women, but, any queer woman or, LGBTQ plus people in general have always found a home in women's rugby specifically. And it was one of the things I really wanted to talk about, because before I came out, in the months before, was when World Rugby announced what you were discussing, which is they announced that they were going to be banning trans women from all international competition. Just pretty much out of nowhere, they kind of got leveraged in the middle of the pandemic and decided to make a move without consulting any of the nations. They said they were going to put it up to a vote and approach different unions from around the world, and they never did that, because I think they found out that the unions were not going to vote in favor of banning trans women. So what happened was, when I came out, I really wanted to shine a light on this, because so few people, one, even knew that it happened. Two, even knew what the regulations were for trans women before they changed it, right? A lot of people didn't even know that they were allowed to participate in international competition. They didn't know the levels of hormones that were required, and the blood tests, and all these other hoops that they have to jump through just to be able to get cleared to play and to be approved. And so that happened, and it was something that I thought was really important to talk about, because I feel like it sets a very dangerous precedence, right? When you say that the best, most well-trained and fittest woman in the world with the most resources and the most coaching can't play against a trans woman because it's too dangerous. Mm-hmm. How long is it until people make the jump that, well, why would anybody be allowed to play against a trans woman, right? Why would a social player rocking up to their club on a Saturday be allowed to play against a trans woman if you're deeming that the best players in the world can't? So that was a concern that I had. And unfortunately, that concern became very real this past year. England RFU came forward, and basically a year after instituting something where they said that what they were going to do was they were going to do a case-by-case basis. They were going to review any trans women who were outside a range of size. I think that size was 5'11". I'd have to look up the exact weight. I think it translates to about 195 pounds. Anybody who was outside those ranges was automatically banned from participating if they were a trans woman. Anybody within that range was subject to an independent review. And they had 4 women who were reviewed this way. All of them were approved. All of them participated without issue. And then following the season, the RFU voted, I think, by a margin of about 6 or 7 votes to outright ban trans women from all levels of grassroots competition, regardless of size, regardless of ability, just said no. And then shortly after that, Ireland said, you know what? I know we don't have any trans women here, but let's do that too. I think they said they had 2 registered at the time they decided to institute that ban. And then Wales decided to get in on the fun as well. And Wales also decided to ban trans women, despite having 0 trans women actually registered in the country. So you immediately see how it spreads, right? It spreads like wildfire by one organization that comes out claiming to do the research. Another organization goes and references that organization as setting a precedence for now changing these policies based on, no evidence provided. And it's something that I've gotten into in a bit of depth before. I try to avoid getting into it in too much depth because I think anybody who's really that interested in this science can go to the World Rugby website and look at their research. Yeah. But if you're curious about some of these advantages and what some of those safety concerns are, basically the biggest concern that they were trying to push or point towards was they were saying that there was an increased risk of head trauma, and that they were trying to deduce this based on the size difference between cis men and cis women. So this is true. If you actually go and look at their research, there's actually no trans woman involved in any of their research around their safety assessments. All that they do is they basically used what was a computer crash simulation model. So what they did is they entered in the size of an average cis male, entered in the size of an average cis woman, and then simulated impact, and then said, hey, if you were to do that, the cis woman is at a 40% increased risk of head trauma. This would be dangerous. Trans women shouldn't play rugby, right? And I think for a lot of people, they'd be able to point out the obvious issue with that, which is we're not talking about cis men playing against cis women. We're talking about trans women who have undergone, a year plus of hormone therapy, as well as providing evidence through blood tests, among a huge other litany of factors that affect their performance. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the disingenuous data that they based this on, which is now spread to forming policies all over the world, which led to them being actually the first ever organization to outright blanket ban trans athletes, trans women specifically.
Interesting. The US and Canada have rejected that, I believe, right?
The USA, when it came out, rejected it and still does not practice those policies. Canada has rejected it and does not practice those policies. New Zealand, which is one of the, is historically the most successful rugby playing nation in the world, has rejected those policies as well. Australia, there's been back and forth, but also has rejected those policies. So it was actually England, I will come out and say, England was one of the first people who rejected the policy. So this is, a year ago, literally 1.5 years ago, Amazing. They came out and rejected the same exact policy that they've now taken a step further, claiming that there's additional data to support it without being able to provide any of that data.
Yeah, I mean, it's... and I mean, it flies in the face of what other sports are doing as well. I mean, I know that in gymnastics, I think that that's very clearly inclusive of trans and non-binary participants. And even 50 years ago, I mentioned tennis earlier because tennis is my thing. 50 years ago on the professional tennis circuit, Renee Richards was accepted as completely now able to compete with women at no advantage. And okay, there's no risk of physical trauma in a non-contact sport. Perhaps that might be something aside, but it's very easy to slip from one, as you said, one sort of fact to another, analogy. And this happens in workplaces as well. Like, in offices, it's very easy for people to start becoming slightly less inclusive, and suddenly you've got a transphobic murmur in what otherwise could be an inclusive workplace. And I've seen that myself in my career in places that I think are very inclusive, but there is an undertone of trans exclusion rather than inclusion, and that can be very, very dangerous. So, it's interesting. I'm going to watch that debate very, very, very closely, just because it's amazing that rugby, as inclusive as it is the first international sport to outright ban, which is quite amazing, right? So, anyway, I think we're on the same page on that one. So let's move on. We wanted to cover a few more intersectional things as well. Obviously, we've been looking at the intersectionality of within the LGBT community, looking at the what often is a bit of a problem between the LGBT and the Ts, and obviously just the intersectionality with sports between and LGBT. Obviously, I love, we mentioned earlier that you played in the Maccabea Games. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that. Obviously, you're a Jewish man. The Maccabea Games are open to all Jewish athletes worldwide. In my past career, I've hosted events which specifically focused on the intersection of being LGBTQ plus and of faith, or of a particular religion or particular ethnicity, and how challenging that can be for certain people in and out of the workplace. And I'd just love to get your thoughts on how has that affected you at all, and if so, how, and what are your observations about how you've managed it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself particularly religious. So in terms of my faith in the workplace, I don't think that really had a tremendous impact on me. But I did want to touch on actually what you mentioned about, just the important intersection we have in workplaces, but also, like you said, in sport. It is a huge vehicle for change, and it really affords these massive, platforms that you can have these kinds of statements on inclusion, on, the importance of making sure your sport is open to absolutely everybody. So when you're looking at the inverse of that, which is, say, something like World Rugby coming out and saying trans women are dangerous, imagine if the statement had been, we're never banning trans women. We never have banned trans women. We've had them in our sport for 20 years. We're not getting rid of them. Everybody is welcome in our sport. Imagine the power that statements like that have coming from a world sporting body. But going back to your question about just my Jewish identity, it was actually something that I really reflected on in Israel this summer when I was there with the USA Maccabi team, because I'd actually, as you mentioned, I'd played with them in 2017, and I'd actually won a gold medal in 2017. But I was in the closet in 2017. I didn't come out to my teammates. I was incredibly close to my teammates, but I didn't feel like, I think I struggled. I talked myself out of it for many reasons. One, because, obviously you're awkward and scary and you don't want to do it. But I talked myself out of it because I told myself that it wasn't relevant, right? I told myself that me being a gay athlete wasn't really relevant to this group of Jewish athletes, right? Like it's my experience, and cool, it might tell them a little bit about myself, but how does that tie into what we're all here experiencing, together? And it took me a while to kind of reconcile that. And I think that after going back there, I realized, how many parallels there were between my experience as a gay athlete and between, the experience historically for Jewish athletes, right? Jewish athletes historically have been told that they can't do it, right? That they are not athletic, that they're too short, that they're too slow, that they're not physical enough to succeed in contact sports. Like, these are all the same exact stereotypes that have been said about gay men, that they wouldn't be able to handle the rigors of competitive professional sport, whatever it might be. And I felt like that enough was a connection for me to say that, look, there's a way that I can tie in my experiences as a queer person with the experiences of these other Jewish athletes that I'm playing with. And when I was there as well, I was also sort of trying to reconcile my opinions around trans inclusion and wanting to be very vocal about that, while also being aware that, yes, I was at a tournament with a bunch of other cis men who have probably never even played with a trans person, are not affected by this policy, probably don't know anybody who is affected by this policy. And I sort of had to revert back to the same thing of thinking of, well, as Jews, one thing that we were very, specific about doing every time we go to Israel is we go and visit Yad Vashem. For those who don't know, that's the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And they have, thousands of accounts of people who were affected by the Holocaust for, all over the world. And the biggest takeaway they have for you when you come out of Yad Vashem is never let this happen again, right? Never allow groups to be demonized while everyone else stands silent. Don't wait until it's your group that is demonized to speak out. And hearing that be such a clear message for me was just another confirmation that I'm doing the right things around this issue, right? It's an issue that people don't feel like they need to speak up about because they don't know people who are affected by it. They don't know people who have experienced it, but that's just not acceptable, right? It's just not acceptable to wait until this issue hits home for all of us, because unfortunately the trans community is not big enough that we're not all going to get that personal connection. We're not all going to get that face to put on the issue. So I think that that's something really important to think about when you're talking about intersectionality, not just in the workplace, but just in life. You need to understand that, you're not always going to have that personal connection to create that empathy, right? Sometimes you need to put in the work and create that empathy for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of the things you've been saying, just, there's obviously a role modeling angle to the fact that, obviously you just decided to embrace it. But I mean, just as you said, I mean, lived experience is not going to be possible for everyone just because we are by definition a minority. But that doesn't mean that people should not practice allyship and advocacy to the extent that we can help them do that by giving them some guidance about what the expectations are. But if we all just sit on our hands and say it's somebody else's problem, eventually that problem is going to come to visit us. And I don't mean us. Everybody's going to say, well, look, everybody else who might have been my supporter is now gone, and here I am on my own. Nobody's going to speak up for me. So allyship matters, intersectionally enormously, right? So particularly in a workplace, and everyone with a minority characteristic, I think, is a natural ally for everybody else with a minority characteristic, even if it's not the same one. But those in a majority as well, like we ought to be saying, like, look at me, I'm got layers of privilege as a white, middle-aged, cis, middle-class, man. I've got layers of privilege. I just happen to be gay. And that's my one minority characteristic. I should make an effort, as we all should, to be allies to everybody else and big them up as well, because it's not just me saying this is not my problem. This is everybody's concern. So, I mean, in that regard, going back to what you do day to day now, you're a global ambassador now for what the actual formal title is. You are a global ambassador for the International Gay Rugby since about a year ago. I imagine during in that capacity, you're doing an awful lot of awareness. What sort of things does that involve?
Yeah, so it's actually, I'm the first global ambassador we've had, so it's a bit of a developing role, but I've actually had a chance to go see directly a lot of our clubs. For example, when I was in Israel, I connected with the Tel Aviv team, which is actually the first inclusive gay rugby team in the entire Middle East. Amazing. So I got to go and run a training for them. I got to meet, all of their players and just sort of tell them a little bit about my experiences, share a little bit of my rugby knowledge. So it's really just been an opportunity to have me sort of front facing with a lot of these organizations, because we've got over 100 worldwide international gay rugby teams, and I kind of want to meet everybody. So I'm just sort of, anytime I'm anywhere near one, I just pop in and I'm like, hey, it's me. Would love to run a training. But I've also gone in and spoken in some schools in the UK about my experiences. And like I said, going to speak to rugby teams, just because I've found that incredibly beneficial. And I've been very happy with just sort of the questions and the genuine curiosity that a lot of players have. In most of my experiences doing that are in the UK, but I always just found it really interesting, just sort of the thoughtful questions they have, and just like I said, just a genuine interest in, oh, here's an openly gay person who's really successful at this sport. That's something that I've never seen before. And they just have thoughtful questions about your experience. So I've been doing a lot of that, just going around trying to meet people and trying to spread the word that international gay rugby is here. There's opportunities for you to play, and don't let whatever your school experience was keep you from picking up a sport you want to try.
And just because you weren't busy enough, you have to do that as well, right? So, but it's so interesting. I mean, again, it's role modeling. It's using the examples that you can. You mentioned going to schools. I mean, one of my other roles that I have is I'm a trustee of a charity in the UK called Diversity Role Models, which does exactly what you've described, sends role models into schools to talk to kids about what it's like to be a minority, and typically being LGBTQ+, to make sure that they are aware of this and kind of nip the possibility of prejudice early in the bud. So it's so powerful to do that, but it comes down to role modeling again, right? So I think I think we're running close to running out of time, but a couple more minutes. I think we've learned a lot of things today, which we can extrapolate quite comfortably into many a work environment around, being your authentic self, supportive team environments, psychological safety, and dealing with your own issues in ways which don't destroy your psychological safety, and looking to role models to help you in that process, and the value of allyship and advocacy. So I mean, I'm thrilled that you've been able to share your story with us, but I always like to end on a fun note, and if you don't mind, because I know, like me, you're a fan of Drag Race. One of the things that they do on Drag Race is always put a picture of you up when you were a tiny little kid, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years old. If 29-year-old Devin could talk to 5 or 6-year-old Devin now, what would you say? You
didn't print out a picture for me.
I didn't want to.
You could have drawn one, maybe. So what was the age again? Give me the age one more time. 7?
Whenever you like. I mean, whatever, whenever you thought it would. You said you mentioned you came out when you were 11, right? So
yeah. So
let's take it at 11 then.
I would say, well, I've been so lucky, right? Like a lot of the things that I would say to myself were things that my parents were saying to me nonstop already, right? Like some of the earliest memories I had were my parents, or my mom specifically, coming up to me and just being like, hey, we don't care who you love as long as you're happy and they love you and you're happy. That's the only thing we care about. And I'm just like 4 years old, like, great, thanks, mom. Like it just didn't register with me, right? But I think those things made a huge difference. But the biggest thing that I would have told myself at that time is what I was mentioning to you, which is just stop dictating your decisions based on like your imaginary worst case scenario person's reaction, right? Like I spent so much time obsessing over the negative fantasy, right? The negative fantasy of, oh, you come out, you lose your opportunities, you lose your chance to play, you have teammates who turn against you, it gets ugly, you don't feel comfortable in your training environments, you have to stop playing the sport you love, right? Like you go through these huge spirals and these downturns. And I don't think I put enough time into the fantasy of, well, what would happen if I were to come out and everything goes better than I expected it to? And like, what would that look like? Like, what would getting to do interviews all over the world and getting to like share your story with amazing people and having them actually listen to and care about the things you say, like, mate, what would that look like? Like that was something that I never took the time to realistically contemplate because I was just so caught in this negative space. So I think that would be the biggest advice, is just to give yourself a chance to fantasize in the positive, right? Like it's just something that I don't think a lot of people do.
Which I think is terrific advice, because I don't think almost anybody does. I mean, those of us who've been through the process of coming out, I mean, not at first of all you do it every day, but the very first time you're going to do it, and even when you're doing it to yourself, I mean, yeah, all you're going to be thinking about is the reasons why you should not do this, right? And eventually the massive reasons why you should do it, to the fact that it being true to yourself and being able to be a healthy individual and not beating yourself up for something that you really have to embrace is not something you give yourself a break about, and you spend all your time thinking, well, what are my friends and colleagues and things going to think? So, well done for you for doing that, and I'm sure your 11-year-old self would have appreciated that advice. So, first of all, let me just say thank you so much, Devin. I think it's been really, really interesting for me. I'm a sports nerd anyway, so I just love to talk about sports. So I could talk to you for hours about that. But I think there have been an awful lot of things that we can take from what you said, which it is interesting. As I say, sport as an international language, if you like, can reach across divides, can reach across cultures, can reach across boundaries in a way that a lot of things can't. And there are things which can be learned from your particular experience around, as I said, things like the importance of allyship, psychological safety, supportive environments, and what people can do as allies, etc., which I think we can take into every workplace and use as learning. So I hope it's been interesting for the people who've watched and will watch this on Catch Up. I certainly enjoyed it very much. So Devin, again, thank you very much for your time. It's been a great pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody tuning in and for making this possible. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me and listen to my story.
Thank you, Devin.